September 14th, 1940. Inside a sealed workroom on the second floor of the munitions building in Washington, a young woman with ink-stained fingers stared at a column of numbers that refused to make sense. Outside, the Capitol sweltered under late summer heat. Inside, the air felt thick with cigarette smoke and the low mechanical clatter of sorting machines. Genevieve Grotjan had been staring at variations of these same encrypted Japanese diplomatic messages for 18 months. The cipher was called Purple, and every senior cryptanalyst in the Signal Intelligence Service had declared it unbreakable. She pressed her pencil against the frequency table one more time. She didn't know it yet, but this tiny anomaly would expose the most secret Japanese diplomatic system of the war. That small gesture, a pencil tip tracing a repeating anomaly buried inside the 20-letter stream, would crack open the most closely guarded diplomatic secret of the Pacific War and hand the United States a window into the strategic mind of Imperial Japan. Genevieve Grotjan was 27 years old, a mathematician in a field dominated by men twice her age, and she had just seen something no one else had noticed. Within weeks, her discovery would allow American intelligence to read Japan's highest-level diplomatic traffic in near real time. Years later, decrypted messages from the Japanese ambassador in Berlin, reports on German coastal defenses and troop dispositions, would guide Allied planners preparing for the Normandy invasion. Her breakthrough shortened the war, saved tens of thousands of lives, and remained classified for decades. When she died in 2006, most obituaries mentioned her briefly, if at all. She had spent the last 60 years of her life carrying secrets she could never share, grieving losses she could never explain, and living with the knowledge that history had quietly erased her. Genevieve Feinstein was born in 1913 in Buffalo, New York, the daughter of working-class parents who valued education above comfort. Her father worked in a factory. Her mother took in laundry. They saved what they could. When Genevieve showed an unusual aptitude for mathematics, solving problems in her head that other children struggled to write down, her teachers encouraged her parents to let her continue. She graduated high school at 16, earned a scholarship to the University at Buffalo, and completed a degree in mathematics during the worst years of the Depression. Finding work was nearly impossible. Teaching positions went to men. Research labs didn't hire women. For 2 years, she took temporary clerical jobs, tutored high school students for pennies, and kept applying. In 1939, she saw a civil service notice for junior mathematicians with the War Department. The pay was modest. The work was described only as statistical analysis. She applied immediately. By the spring of 1939, she was sitting in a cramped office inside the Signal Intelligence Service, part of a small, underfunded unit tasked with intercepting and decrypting foreign communications. The head of the unit, William Friedman, had built a team of linguists, engineers, and mathematicians who worked in near-total secrecy. Genevieve was assigned to the Japanese diplomatic section. Her job, at first, was purely clerical, sorting intercepted messages, logging frequencies, typing up worksheets for senior analysts. No one expected her to solve anything. The Japanese had introduced a new cipher machine in early 1939 to replace their older red system. American cryptanalysts called the new system Purple. It was built on principles no one had seen before: telephone stepping switches instead of traditional rotors, creating patterns so complex that brute force methods were useless. Senior analysts studied the traffic for months and found nothing. Friedman himself, one of the most brilliant codebreakers in the world, had spent a year on Purple and made almost no progress. Genevieve kept her head down and did her work. She sorted intercepts. She filled out frequency tables by hand, row after row, marking down how often certain letter groups appeared in different positions. The work was tedious, repetitive, and exhausting. She arrived early, stayed late, and said little. A few joked that she'd married into the department, though she hadn't. When she asked questions during briefings, senior analysts sometimes answered slowly, as if she might not understand. She understood perfectly. By the summer of 1940, the Purple Project had consumed thousands of hours and produced almost nothing. The machine's internal logic remained invisible. Friedman was beginning to show signs of strain: sleepless nights, nervous exhaustion, the early tremors of a breakdown that would later hospitalize him. The team was fracturing under pressure. Some believed Purple couldn't be broken without capturing the actual machine. Others thought the Japanese had designed a system with no mathematical vulnerabilities at all. Genevieve didn't believe that. She had noticed something in the frequency tables that no one else seemed to consider important. Purple split its messages into two distinct groups: 6 letters that behaved in predictable ways, and 20 letters that seemed random. Most analysts focused on the 6-letter section because it was easier to track. Genevieve kept returning to the 20-letter stream. It looked chaotic, but chaos doesn't repeat. Patterns repeat. She began isolating specific positions within the 20-letter groups and tracking how often certain letters appeared in the same relative positions across multiple messages. She did this by hand, filling page after page of ruled graph paper with pencil marks, cross-referencing intercepts from different days, different senders, different lengths. It was painstaking, manual work. There were no computers, no calculators beyond basic adding machines. Everything had to be checked twice. Her colleagues barely noticed. She was a junior analyst doing clerical drudgery. Then, in early September, she found it. Buried inside the 20-letter stream was a faint, almost invisible repeating cycle. The letters weren't random. They stepped through a sequence that depended on how many times the internal switches had moved. It was subtle, barely detectable across short messages, but when she lined up dozens of intercepts and tracked the positions carefully, the pattern emerged like a shape seen through fog. That was the flaw. The machine's designers had assumed the stepping intervals were irregular enough to hide the pattern. They were wrong. On September 20th, 1940, Genevieve walked into Friedman's office and showed him her worksheets. She explained, in calm, precise language, what she had found. Friedman studied the tables for a long time without speaking. Then he called in Frank Rowlett, another senior cryptanalyst. The three of them spent the rest of the day working through the logic. Within 2 weeks, the team had built a functional analog of the Purple machine, using telephone switches scavenged from a supply depot. They didn't know exactly what the Japanese machine looked like inside, but they didn't need to. Genevieve's discovery had given them the blueprint. By October, SIS was reading Purple traffic in near real time. The intelligence product was codenamed Magic. It was transformative. Japanese diplomats used Purple to send reports on everything from peace negotiations to detailed military assessments. Ambassador Hiroshi Oshima, stationed in Berlin, sent long, carefully observed dispatches about German troop movements, fortifications, and strategic planning. After touring the Atlantic Wall in late 1943, Oshima cabled Tokyo with minute descriptions of coastal defenses, minefields, and artillery placements along the French coast. Those intercepts were among the most valuable pieces of intelligence the Allies received before D-Day. Planners used Oshima's observations to refine landing strategies, avoid heavily defended sectors, and anticipate German responses. Historians later estimated that Magic intelligence shortened the Pacific War by at least a year and saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Genevieve received no public recognition. Friedman's name appeared in classified reports. Rowlett was later honored for his contributions. Genevieve was listed in internal files as a junior cryptanalytic aide. She didn't complain. The work itself mattered more than the credit, but the cost was accumulating in ways she hadn't anticipated. After Purple, she was reassigned to other projects. The war dragged on. The workload never lightened. By 1943, she had moved into Soviet cipher work, another area where her mathematical precision made her invaluable. One winter morning, she circled 2 identical number groups on different Soviet pads, a duplication so impossible that she stopped writing mid-stroke. For the first time since Purple, she felt the quiet shock of discovering a flaw others had missed. Soviet diplomatic traffic used one-time pads, theoretically unbreakable, but some of the pads had been duplicated and reused during the war's chaotic early years. That duplication created tiny vulnerabilities. Genevieve was part of the team that identified those duplications and began the slow, grinding work of extracting meaning from the noise. The intelligence product was eventually codenamed Venona, and once again, Genevieve's contributions were buried in classification. By 1945, she was exhausted. The war had ended, but the secrets remained. She married another mathematician, Hyman Feinstein, and tried to build a normal life. They had a son. She couldn't tell her husband what she had done during the war, not in any detail. She couldn't tell her son. The Official Secrets Act bound her for life. She left government service quietly and took a teaching position at a small college. She published no papers and gave no interviews. When students asked if she had worked during the war, she said yes, in a clerical role. Nothing important. Her son inherited her gift for mathematics. He was brilliant, curious, and driven. She watched him grow with a mixture of pride and sorrow, recognizing in him the same relentless need to understand the world that had defined her own youth. Then he died, suddenly, unexpectedly. The details were private, and she never spoke of them publicly. For the first time in her life, there was a problem she could not solve, a pattern she could not decipher. After that, something in her withdrew even further. She carried two kinds of grief: the grief every parent knows, and the older, quieter grief of a woman who had changed history and could never say so. Declassification came slowly. In the 1970s, parts of the magic story became public. Friedman was celebrated as the father of American cryptanalysis. Rowlett wrote memoirs. A few historians mentioned a Miss Grotjan in footnotes, crediting her with an unspecified contribution to the Purple solution. Most accounts focused on the men. It wasn't until the 1990s, after most of the wartime cryptanalysts had died, that researchers began piecing together the fuller story. Archival documents revealed the scope of her breakthrough. Colleagues who were still alive confirmed that her insight had been the key. In 2001, she was inducted into the National Security Agency's Hall of Honor, 60 years after her discovery, 5 years before her death. She attended the ceremony quietly, in a wheelchair, surrounded by family. She didn't speak. When reporters asked how it felt to finally be recognized, she said only that she had done her job and was proud of the work. She never spoke publicly about the son she lost. She never explained the full weight of carrying unshared secrets for 6 decades. She never said whether the late recognition felt like vindication or simply an acknowledgement of something that should never have been hidden in the first place. She died in 2006 at 93 in a Maryland nursing home. Her obituary in the Washington Post ran 6 paragraphs. It mentioned her role in breaking Purple, briefly noted her later work on Soviet ciphers, and listed her survivors. It did not convey the scale of what she had accomplished or the cost of living with it. Thousands of women worked in intelligence during the war: codebreakers, analysts, translators, operators, and most of them vanished from the historical record. Their work was classified, their contributions uncredited, their names erased by a combination of institutional sexism, Cold War secrecy, and the simple passage of time. Genevieve Grotjan Feinstein was one of the few whose story was eventually recovered, and even then, only partially. The graph paper worksheets she filled by hand in 1940 are stored now in a climate-controlled archive at the National Security Agency. Her pencil marks are still visible, faint, precise, methodical. They trace the invisible architecture of a cipher machine she never saw, never touched, but understood better than anyone alive. Those marks represent one of the most important intelligence breakthroughs of the Second World War. They represent 18 months of silent, unrecognized labor. They represent a young woman who saw what no one else could see, and who carried the consequences of that vision for the rest of her life. And they raise a question that still echoes through the quiet halls of history. How many other insights, how many other breakthroughs, how many other lives like hers were simply lost because the world wasn't ready to remember them?